بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أما بعد. This is a topic I don't often discuss, but it's in response to a request from some dear brothers and I can't turn them down. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward them. It pertains to memories I hold from my time in Medina, and there's so many that stand out. I'll mention one of them inshallah, and I'll try to be as brief as possible. One of them pertains to the time I spent with a sheikh there. His name is Shaykh Abdel Azeez Al-Qari, a remarkable scholar, despite the fact that there were matters that we disagreed upon and discussed at length, and we discussed them many times, even when I was very young. He was humble enough to give me some time and lend an ear to someone like me as young as I was. When my father was a student in Medina, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant him a long life full of deeds, Shaykh Abdel Azeez Al-Qari held the position of the Dean of the Quran faculty in the university. And just before we left Medina, when my father graduated and completed his studies, I was around 11 or 12 years old. At that time, Shaykh Abdel Azeez Al-Qari was appointed as the Imam and Khatib of Masjid GHURABÂ. In addition to his role at the university and Masjid GHURABÂ, he also headed the large Quran complex in Medina. With as many ulama as there were at the time, I'm not aware of anyone who held as many prestigious positions as those at once in Medina during that period. Now, after completing high school, I returned back to Medina to study at the university level. That's when I became close to him. He was still the Imam of Masjid GHURABÂ, and he also served as our TAFSީR teacher in the Sharia faculty of the University of Medina, Kulliyat al-Sharia, which is the faculty that I chose. His knowledge of Quranic sciences was unparalleled at the time. I believe he was among the most knowledgeable figures, not only in Medina, but globally. And not only in Quranic sciences, but also in various other fields. In qira'at, he not only mastered the qira'at that are mutawatira, but others like the mashhura, and the mawdu'a, and the mudraja, and the shadha, and the ahadiyya. Qira'at, in tafsir, in tajweed, these are fields that require a lifetime of dedication, especially for someone like him who not only specialized in these areas, but also had prominent positions overseeing one of the largest Quran complexes and being the Dean of the Quran faculty. Positions that demand supervision over other giants in the field. Giants who are probably among the biggest ulama in this field globally. He closely supervised their tasks, and that shows his status in this field. His expertise didn't end there. He was also an expert in fiqh and in usul al-fiqh and in hadith and in seerah and in many other Islamic sciences. And not only did he know these fields, but he also mastered them. And he was among the shuyukh who inherited a great amount of knowledge from Shaykh Muhammad Al-Amin Al-Shanqiti, the author of Adwa' Al-Bayan. He was one of my teachers who had studied with Al-Shanqiti. So did Shaykh Atiyya Salam, who taught me and my father. And so did Bakr Abu Zayd, who taught me. What made Shaykh Abdel Azeez Al-Qari even more remarkable was that he was also a skilled farmer. He was a talented calligrapher. He was even an artist. His profound knowledge and talents combined with the way he conveyed his knowledge and his wisdom, that all left a lasting impact on those who had the honor of studying under him. He's also well known for his profound love for the heritage of Al-Medina. He had a collection of rare photographs of Medina, some that were over a century old back in those days. And he had some rare photographs that he took himself when he was very young, back when cameras were not even common there at that time. And he wrote books on Al-Medina, and he wrote books on other matters. And his books would take 10 to 20 years to publish because he valued depth and quality, and he feared Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best what's in the hearts. You see, those who, despite having little experience or knowledge, hasten to publish books, many times they're filled with errors, aside from the flaws in their character and behavior and manhaj. Yet it took him 10 to 15 to 20 years to publish a book, and he's a alim. In Arabic, he memorized countless lines of mutun pertaining to the Arabic language and other sciences as well. And he always spoke in Fusha. If you closely observe many who master the Arabic language, they get drifted away into their dialect at times. In their personal lives, sometimes they'll speak in their own dialect. Sometimes in khutab and durus, they'll slip in their dialect, even though they are considered experts in Arabic. Shaykh Abdel Azeez Al-Qari spoke in Fusha. He never mixed any dialect with his Fusha, even when he spoke with his family, or in casual conversations, or moments of emotion, whether he was happy or angry. I've seen him in all those settings. He always spoke in Fusha. And if someone was to live with him, not knowing his background, they would never be able to tell where he's from, because he never used the known Medina dialect, the distinct Medina dialect, or any other dialect. In fact, I never heard him slip. And subhanallah, one thing brings another to mind. When you talk about these matters, one thing brings another to mind from your memory. This reminds me of my closest friend when I was in Medina, a fellow student during my days in Medina, Shaykh al-Mujahid al-Imam Abu Anas al-Shami, Shaykh Umar Yusuf Jum'a Saleh, the man, the giant who later became the Shaykh of al-Zarqawi and his Shari'i advisor on all matters during the Fallujah days in Iraq. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept both. He too always spoke in Fusha. And subhanallah, another thing that I remembered, it was with Shaykh Abu Anas that I would go visit Shaykh Abdel Azeez Al-Qari. And when he graduated a few years before me. Before he left to Jordan, he told me, stick with that Shaykh. And it was after that I became even closer with Shaykh Abdel Azeez Al-Qari. Shaykh Abu Anas, taqabbalahu Allah, shared the same characteristic in that he spoke Fusha all the time. He told me it was because his father raised him speaking Fusha since he was a young child. Shaykh Abdel Azeez Al-Qari's speeches and lessons and private conversations were not just in Fusha, but they were eloquent. His words flowed as if he were authoring a book. His mastery of Fusha and Balagha was evident, whether he was on the minbar or in a classroom or in private conversations or in private lessons. He was always very articulate in Arabic. I remember one time the technician in charge of the microphone in Masjid Quba was asking Shaykh Abdel Azeez about the microphone settings, something pertaining to the echo or something pertaining to that, and how he preferred the microphone to be set up on the minbar. This was right before Salat al-Jum'ah. The technician, who was from our brothers in South Asia, didn't speak Arabic fluently, but he did understand some Arabic in the Saudi dialect from living there so long. It was difficult for the Shaykh to communicate with him directly because he always spoke in Fusha. So I had to translate for the brother in English to facilitate the conversation. The Shaykh was also blessed with a remarkable memory in Hifظ and in other matters, and in recalling knowledge and retaining knowledge. He was extraordinary in all of that. And even in Dunya matters. During one of our visits to Medina, which was 4 years exactly after my father graduated, we went there to perform Hajj, and we visited Masjid Quba. We prayed in the center of the masjid. And after we prayed 2 rak'ah, Shaykh Abdel Azeez Al-Qari must have been near the mihrab. He spotted my father and he immediately recognized him and he approached him and he insisted that we come to his house for dinner, which is somewhat unusual because he has hundreds of students every single semester, every single year. And also, what stands out in his memory, in affirming that he has a sharp memory, is that he never used notes. There were two people in my life that guided me to never use notes during a Jum'ah khutbah. It was my father and Shaykh Abdel Azeez Al-Qari. I remember when I was younger and I was preparing at one time for a khutbah at a very large masjid. It wasn't my first khutbah, but it was my first major khutbah in a very big masjid with a huge congregation. So I took notes that I had prepared, and my father was with me. When we got down from the car, he told me, "What's that?" About my notes. I said, "They're notes I plan to use." He said, "Put them away." So he made me leave them in the car. And alhamdulillah, I delivered the khutbah without notes. The brothers there loved it, and I never used notes in a khutbah in my life, before that or after that. And it's also following in my father's footsteps. He never relied on notes. And also, Shaykh Abdel Azeez Al-Qari informed me the same. Shaykh Abdel Azeez Al-Qari did not use notes in his khutab, nor even in his lessons. I never saw him use notes. Upon my release from prison, I saw any information I could find about him because I was in contact with him until days before I went to prison. So I was really searching for his phone number. Eventually, I stumbled upon a video, which was a private gathering, and it seemed to be the only video lecture of his that's available online. And I could be wrong. To my surprise, he was reading from notes. This surprised me very much, and it still surprises me because I never seen him use notes in any class, let alone any khutbah, regardless of how complex the topic was. My only assumption, wallahu alam, is that the hardships and trials that he faced in his latter years may have affected him, and it usually does have an effect on one's memory at times. He also had a habit of speaking slow. But even though his speaking pace was slow in classes and in khutab, which sometimes causes the audience to lose focus, he still captivated the audience from beginning to end. You genuinely enjoyed his choice of words and the flow of his speech and even the flow of the letters from his mouth. And perhaps it's from the effect of his mastery of tajweed and makharij al-huruf and qira'at. In his tafsir class at the university, he captivated everyone. Other teachers at times couldn't get the class to concentrate. But when he taught, he created an atmosphere so profound that you could hear a pin drop. His style drew you in. And he mentioned humorous matters that had lessons in them. And I think in that video, he mentioned some humorous matters as well. And I think it's the only video, like I said, that I know that he has on the internet. And I saw the concentration of the students in the university because I sat in the front of the classroom. In Medina, back then, when you were assigned seats, sometimes you would have the seat in the front or the middle or the back. It was a random order, and you would have to sit throughout the whole year in the same seat. When my father was in Medina, if his seat was in the middle, the assigned seat was in the middle or the back, he would take his desk and chair and the teacher's hair, he would put it right on the side. It seemed a bit out of order, but it helped him concentrate and hear more clearly, and it helped avoid distractions. I followed the same practice. So if the teacher was there, my desk was right on the side. And that's how I could see the concentration of the students when he spoke. Just as his style of speech was slow, his teaching pace was even slower. He delved deeply into details of whatever he taught, whether it was tafsir or other topics. And now we have juhal who criticize going into details, whether it's in fiqh or tafsir or tawheed. But thoroughness is usually a hallmark of a true alim, and it's something juhal can't recognize. At the university, the tafsir curriculum at that time encouraged the teachers to aim to complete in one juz of Quran each semester in tafsir. Many teachers came close to that goal. But Shaykh Abdel Azeez went into so much depth and detail that during the entire semester that he taught us, he only covered 3.5 ayat from Surah An-Nisa. I still remember where he stopped. When it came time for the final exams, other teachers posed challenging and complicated questions, yet his questions were very simple and easy to answer. And my father told me way before this that reflects the strength of a true teacher and a scholar. A alim imparts knowledge and he ensures that the students grasp that message and lesson through his teaching tactics. Then he avoids overwhelming them with impossible and difficult questions. I remember seeing the same approach with Sheikh Muhammad Al-Mukhtar Al-Shanqiti, who's now unfortunately a member of Hay'at Kibar Al-Ulama. They were actually trying to get him to be a member of Hay'at Kibar Al-Ulama from around 1999 or so, and he refused. And he kept giving him the excuse that he needs to take care of his mother until he finally accepted in 2009, unfortunately. He was a classmate of my father. In fact, in 2 of the years, he sat next to my father. When I went to study, he was my teacher. He was my fiqh teacher. And I recall that we had 4 fiqh teachers per semester, and each one would provide a page or more of detailed, challenging questions for the exam. Yet Sheikh Mukhtar's questions were 2 lines. He taught fiqh in depth and detail, but then his question was 2 lines. And let me say what stood out the most to me personally, beyond Shaykh Abdel Azeez's vast knowledge and impeccable memory and talents, what stood out the most for me was his courage. When he was moved by something and convinced by something, he showed no fear. His bravery was unmatched, especially knowing the consequences that he will face. He didn't follow the scripted khutab that other khutabā adhered to back then. That's why the masjid during his khutab expanded beyond the parking lot. There was people in the parking lot, talabat ilm. And some ulama went to Masjid Quba instead of in Masjid al-Nabawi to listen to his khutab. He spoke with courage and conviction. He loved jihad. He loved the khilafah. And he spoke for the causes of the ummah. In fact, this is another thing that I remember. Before the first Gulf War, when Osama bin Laden taqabbalahu Allah was allowed to travel freely in and out of Bilad al-Haramain and as well as between Pakistan and Afghanistan and elsewhere, at the time when he was respected and hailed a hero, even in Bilad al-Haramain, many don't even know my first 2 years or a little bit less than that, maybe 1.5 years in Medina, Osama bin Laden had an office and a representative in every single city in Bilad al-Haramain, in Riyadh, in Medina, in Mecca, in Jeddah, in Al-Sharqiyya and elsewhere. At the time, he was fighting the Russians for the sake of Allah, inshallah. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best what's in the heart. The government didn't allow him to do that because he was protecting Muslims and protecting and fighting for their land. It was because his actions during the war with the Soviets aligned with the interests of the United States, who are the masters of the current 3rd Saudi state. Shortly after that, he became a terrorist, and the Saudi government sent a delegation asking Mullah Umar to hand him over. The point is, whenever Osama bin Laden visited Medina during that time, he would visit Shaykh Abdel Azeez Al-Qari's house, and he would seek advice from him, and he would ask him questions. There were times when Shaykh Abdel Azeez addressed matters in his khutab that he knew would cause him harm, and they did cause him harm. He was told not to speak about them. And I often thought that the least consequence he might face would be dismissal from his teaching positions, and more importantly, his role as the Imam of Quba, which was a very, very high position, which eventually happened. He got dismissed from all of that in 1992 or 93. Shaykh Abdel Azeez Al-Qari used to begin his first khutbah while I was there. Nearly every single khutbah that I attended, except maybe a couple, he would begin the first khutbah with a slow pace tafsir of Surah Yusuf, because his specialty was tafsir. The second khutbah would focus on a current event. And again, one thing reminds you of another. When I used to deliver khutab, whether they were in Arabic or in English, I would end them in a unique ending. And it wasn't something from me. It's something I actually memorized from Shaykh Abdel Azeez Al-Qari. It's taken verbatim from exactly how he used to end his khutab. In some of his khutab, he frequently highlighted the danger posed by the Rawafid in Medina. And that was significant, because not only was it something he's not supposed to talk about, but the Rawafid in Medina, who were referred to as the Nakhawla, their neighborhoods were right next to Masjid Quba. They were so close to the masjid that they could even hear the khutbah through the speakers. And it came to a point where they wrote complaints to the Amir, the Prince of Medina, saying that there's a sheikh speaking against them, causing division, and matters might escalate, so we demand a meeting. One day he told me that he's summoned to meet the Prince of Medina because the Nakhawla, the Rafida, who are residents of Medina, had gone to the Amir of Medina and complained that there's someone speaking against them and he's causing major divisions. So the Amir gathered some scholars, some of the heads of Medina, and he gathered those who made the complaint, the leaders of the Nakhawla. And he said, who is it that you're saying? Angrily, he said, who is it that you're saying is causing division? Shaykh Abdel Azeez Al-Qari told me the night before he made dua asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to silence their tongues. When the Amir asked, he said nobody spoke. Nobody mentioned his name, even though he said, I know they meant me because I was the only one at that time who spoke about them. He also delivered several khutab where he cautioned the people of Medina against renting to the Rawafid who come from Iran for Hajj and Umrah. And many adhered to his words. His words still echo in my ears as if I'm hearing them today. In his slow, deliberate pace, each letter, let alone word, was flowing with clarity. He would raise his voice and say, Al-Madinatu haramun, faman ahdatha fiha hadathan, aw awa muhdithan, فعليه لعنة الله والملائكة والناس أجمعين لا يقبل منه يوم القيامة عدل ولا صرف. He would repeat it again and again. Medina is a sacred territory. Whoever brings in a bid'ah or shelters a mubtada, he shall incur the curse of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the angels and all of people. And on Yawm al-Qiyamah, no repentance or compensation will be accepted from him. And then he would say, if you're renting your buildings or your apartments to the Rawafid, then you've sheltered an innovator in Medina. And the curse of Allah and the angels and the people will be upon you. Many adhered, and that caused the problem. That was actually against the government, because the government is the one who let them in. There were times when the Hujjaj from Iran were not allowed entry, when the Saudi government had issues with Iran. But the Shaykh's khutbah on this matter took place during periods when they were welcomed in Medina and Mecca. And the government requested that khutabā not speak about this matter, about the Rafida of Iran, and especially in the major masajid there. The third Saudi state uses religion for political purposes. When there were political tensions with Iran, they would give the green light to speak against the Rawafid and how deviant they are. However, when relations improved, they would instruct, especially the major masajid, not to mention anything about the Rawafid. Not long after that, the first Gulf War broke out. And the despicable seed of the modern day Murji'ah began to grow. And it started for the most part in Medina, for those who know and remember. And they began to write misleading reports about him to the government. From the mimbar in Masjid Quba, he gave many khutab exposing the modern day Murji'ah. I attended every one of them. I personally recorded every one of them, and we posted them years later on our site as-salafiyun.com. We were the first to post them on that site. He used to call them al-khuluf, and in some gatherings that we had with him, he used to call them al-mutakhallifin, the retarded ones or the rejects, a term I later adopted and I translated as the Murji'ah rejects. Many ulama and respectable people would attend salah behind him, including my teacher Shaykh Ahmad Al-Ansari, who I don't think there was a Jum'ah I attended there except that he also attended there. And I've heard him praise the Shaykh. Some Murji'ah would even pray behind him, and in the front rows as well. Many remember a quote I mentioned about Sheikh Kishk and what he said about the people in the first row. It's similar to Shaykh Abdel Azeez Al-Qari's experience as well. The Shaykh had a habit of asking some individuals when they come talk to him or shake his hand, did you enjoy the khutbah? Did you like the khutbah? And he happened to ask one of the leaders of the Murji'ah. He said, did you enjoy the khutbah? He said, it's a great khutbah. And he hailed the Shaykh with praises. The Shaykh smiled. Later on at his house, it might have been that same day or the day after, he said, do you remember so-and-so who gave me salam? I said, yes. And I'm very surprised he actually praised your khutbah. He said he wrote a report about me just 2 weeks ago. And it was sent to me so I can respond to the allegations he made against me. And he showed me the report in that individual's handwriting and his signature. But he did not know that the report was sent to him to write a response to it. Eventually, around 1993, the slander and lies spread by the Murji'ah became overwhelming. The continuous reports and relentless slander and false allegations, which is a habit that runs in the blood of the Murji'ah, it reached a point where they dismissed him from his positions as the Imam of Masjid Quba and all his teaching positions as well. He sacrificed among the highest positions ulama of Medina could reach for speaking the truth, and he didn't even care about it. From that point onward, he accepted the qada of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he remained in his home for the most part, especially in his library, with some very rare appearances, until his death about 2 years or so ago. There's many more stories about his courage, but another quality I loved about him was his zuhd. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best what lies in the hearts. He never sought to profit from his da'wah or his positions. When he was offered money for the historic pictures that he had, he refused the offers. And they were very generous offers. In fact, he would print his books with his own money, and he would distribute his books for free. Compare that to some today who collect donations every other day. Every other day there's a new account collecting donations and then charging for classes. And in reality, they're at a level in knowledge where they should be paying the students for the time they spend listening to them. A man of the Shaykh's stature Shaykh Abdel Azeez Al-Qari, who holds such high positions, he would typically receive generous grants and gifts, especially because of his prestigious position of being the Imam of Quba and also the head of the Quran complex. The gifts included annual gifts from both the government and unofficial sources, as well as Eid gifts and gifts from the king or members of the family when they visit Medina. However, I know for a fact, and it's something I saw with my eyes, that he would either return the gifts, or if he wasn't able to, he would give it to the poor and needy. And I asked him why he never accepted gifts or reward for his da'wah when others not only took them, but they asked for more. And he told me that his father, who was also a very big alim, his father raised him not to take compensation or gifts for da'wah. As most know, my father instilled the same values in me when I was a child, even before I met the Shaykh. There's so much more to mention about my experience with the Shaykh, but I'll conclude with one or two more incidents. One of them pertains to a khutbah in 1997 in Al-Masjid Al-Nabawi. Rafsanjani from Iran visited Al-Madinah, and it was alleged that when they opened the hujra of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as they do for diplomatic guests, Rafsanjani allegedly spat towards the grave of Umar radiallahu an and said something about him and Abu Bakr radiallahu anhuma. Those who lived during that time know the story very well. The following day, he attended the Jum'ah khutbah in Al-Masjid Al-Nabawi with his diplomatic entourage and the security around him. Because of what was rumored, or simply maybe because Rafsanjani was a Rafidi, Al-Hudayfi changed his original khutbah to one about the Rafida. It became one of the most powerful khutbahs the mimbar in Al-Masjid Al-Nabawi had witnessed in a very long time. You could hear the anger and hurt in Al-Hudayfi's words. And he was banned from being an imam and a khatib for many years after that. And the khutbah was banned from being circulated officially. And back then, we were the first to publish it on the internet on as-salafiyun.com. The point is, it was Shaykh Abdel Azeez Al-Qari who called his friend Al-Hudayfi and told him, tomorrow's your big day. He inspired him and he stayed on him, and he told him, no matter what you lose, it's something mighty you will meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with. Al-Hudayfi adhered to that advice and delivered that stunning khutbah. It was delivered by Al-Hudayfi, but inspired by Abdel Azeez Al-Qari. And they were very, very close friends. Anytime they ran into each other, and sometimes I would be with Shaykh Abdel Azeez Al-Qari in his car, and he would see Al-Hudayfi in his car. And they would pull over and go to the side and speak for hours. They were very close friends. A final incident, and it's more of a personal one, is something that happened during the Gulf War in 1990. An incident occurred where approximately 47 Saudi women drove through the streets of Riyadh in a motorcade protest. They drove through the capital, and back then driving was banned for women, so they were detained for a day or two. At that time, women were not allowed to drive in what they call Saudi Arabia. And it wasn't just driving that they were protesting. They were pushing for a liberal lifestyle because many of them were graduates of Western universities. The ulama, including the virtuous ones, and the objectives of the government were aligned by the qadr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on this issue. They were all against what the women were doing. And the righteous ulama were more concerned with their ideology. On numerous occasions before Jum'ah, I would drive to Shaykh Abdel Azeez Al-Qari's house, which was located in a neighborhood right next to the University of Medina. I used to live at that time, the last 2 years in Medina, and near Masjid Quba. I would drive from near Masjid Quba to near the university to pick him up for Salat al-Jum'ah. And I had deep respect for him, as a student should be. Even though he knew I was coming to his house, sometimes it was based on his request, I would always stop before reaching his house at a payphone. There was no cell phones back then, so I would stop at a payphone. And at times I would have to sit and look around for a functioning payphone and then find some change to put in the payphone. But I wouldn't go to his house unless I called him to let him know I'm 2-3 minutes away. His house was, in the front of it, was surrounded by a cemented wall and a gate. So he would tell me, walk in the main gates and wait for me. And I never had the courage to go inside unless I was walking with him or behind him. And of course, there may be a lack of coherence in my words because I'm recalling the stuff from 35 years ago and without preparation. After sunrise on Fridays, right until before Salat al-Jum'ah, that was the best of my sleep during the week, because that was a time that there was no halaqat or classes. And the Shaykh knew this. So he would tell me, don't pick me up so you can rest. And I would say, if that's the only reason, if resting is the only reason, I still want to come. I wanted to drive him because during our drives, I took the opportunity to inquire about certain masail, both en route to the masjid and on our way back. That particular week, in November 1990, a day or two before Friday, Wednesday or Thursday, he sent someone to me in the haram to ensure that I pick him up for Salat al-Jum'ah, which was rather unusual. When I arrived to pick him up, I saw Shaykh Musa Al-Qarni's car in front of his house. Both Shaykh Musa Al-Qarni and Shaykh Abdel Azeez Al-Qari are now dead. One of them died in prison, the other died sidetracked and in seclusion. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have mercy on both of them. Both of them were discussing something and waiting for me to drive them in the Shaykh's car. That was very unusual. It wasn't a time when the Shaykh got visits. They didn't inform me of what's going on, and out of respect and shyness, I didn't ask any questions. In that Jum'ah khutbah in November of 1990, after the Shaykh discussed Surah Yusuf, in his second khutbah, he spoke about the women protesters. And it wasn't just about them driving. He mainly talked about how liberalism and the Western ideology were influencing the people's thoughts and the country as a whole. After Salat al-Jum'ah, Shaykh Musa Al-Qarni stood up to deliver a speech similar to what Shaykh Abdel Azeez Al-Qari had delivered, but much more fiery. And such actions were not customary in Masjid Quba at that time, nor any other masjid. You don't just stand up after Salah and give speeches. The speeches were so passionate and powerful that nearly all attendees at Masjid Quba who stayed to listen to Shaykh Musa Al-Qarni's talk, which was approximately maybe 3/4 of the original crowd, they lined up and gathered around the shuyukh to give them salam. And I, being, I think, 19 years old at that time, maybe 20, I was serving as their driver and waiting to transport them back home. And I'm the one who puts the shoes for them to wear. And I found myself positioned between the two sheikhs during this interaction. As the masjid crowded to give them salam and kiss their forehead, the people passing through also gave the kid in between the salam. And something I'll never forget, and the reason why I mentioned and shared this story is when a very old man kissed Shaykh Abdel Azeez Al-Qari's forehead, and then he pointed at me with a stick and he told Shaykh Abdel Azeez Al-Qari, "Your son?" The Shaykh said, "Wa'az," which translates to even more beloved or more dear. That moment stayed with me. That gesture alone, aside from all that he taught me, was a debt upon my neck that I made dua and will continue to make dua for him until I meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When he was alive, I always made dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guides him in the matters that I felt he cited the truth in. And there's many more stories to mention, but inshallah I'll stop with this one. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam.